Morning arrived softly over the plains. Not with noise, not with hurry, just a pale ribbon of light stretching slowly across the horizon, touching the tall prairie grass until each blade glowed gold for a moment before bending again in the wind. The land out west had a way of waking quietly, like an old man rising from sleep, careful not to disturb the memories resting in his bones. A lone road cut across the valley like a faded scar. Dust rested there, patient and thin, waiting for footsteps. And that morning, footsteps finally came. They were small but stubborn. Boots worn thin from miles of wandering pressed into the dry earth. Each step left behind a mark that the wind tried gently to erase. The girl walking that road carried almost nothing. A small cloth bag, a canteen nearly empty, a dress that had known better days and harsher storms. But in her eyes there lived something the prairie wind could not blow away. Hope. Her name was Clara Whitmore. Once upon a time, not so many seasons ago, Clara had belonged to a place that felt like forever. A small homestead near the foothills where the grass grew tall and the creek sang gently through the rocks. Her father used to say that land spoke to those who listened long enough. He had been a quiet man with hands shaped by soil and patience. Her mother carried laughter in her voice like a lantern on a dark road. And Clara had grown up believing the world, though wide and unpredictable, was still kind enough to hold a small family together. But the West had its own ideas about kindness. First came the drought. The sky turned stubborn. Clouds drifted past without mercy. Crops curled into themselves like frightened children. Her father worked harder than the sun itself. But even the strongest hands cannot squeeze rain from an empty sky. Debt followed, then sickness. And one winter morning, when the frost clung to every fence post like glass, Clara buried the last piece of the life she once knew. Her father beneath the frozen earth. Her mother not long after. Silence settled over the empty homestead. The house creaked at night. The wind moved through the fields like a stranger. So Clara did the only thing the West sometimes asks of its people. She kept walking, town after town, road after road. Some places offered a meal. Some offered nothing but a closed door and a polite apology. Work for a woman alone was a rare kindness out here. Still she walked, because hope, even when small, can carry a person farther than despair ever could. By the time Clara reached the town of Red Hollow, the sun had climbed high enough to warm the wooden rooftops. Red Hollow sat quietly between two low hills, the buildings leaning toward each other as if sharing old secrets. Dust moved slowly through the streets. A horse tied outside the general store flicked its tail lazily. Nothing about the town felt cruel, just tired. Clara stepped onto the boardwalk outside the first building she saw. The wooden planks creaked beneath her boots. Inside the blacksmith shop, a broad man hammered iron into shape. Each strike echoed through the room like distant thunder. Clara waited politely. When he finally noticed her, he wiped sweat from his forehead with a cloth. "Morning, miss." His voice held no suspicion, just curiosity. Clara spoke gently. "I'm looking for work." The blacksmith studied her for a long moment, not judging, just measuring the truth of her words against the reality of her thin frame and travel-worn dress. "Work doing what exactly?" "Anything that needs doing. Stable cleaning, cooking, washing." I learned quickly. The blacksmith sighed softly, setting his hammer aside. "Wish I could help you, miss. Truly do. But folks around here don't usually hire women for ranch work. Not the kind that keeps the lights burning anyway." He offered a small smile that carried apology more than refusal. "You might try the general store. Mr. Watkins sometimes needs help stacking supplies." Clara thanked him. She always thanked people, even when hope slipped quietly from her hands. Outside again, the sun felt hotter now. The general store stood across the street, its windows filled with sacks of flour and glass jars of candy. Inside smelled of leather and tobacco. Mr. Watkins, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, listened politely as Clara spoke. Then he shook his head with a sigh. "Already got 2 boys helping me." He paused before adding kindly, "Truth is, miss, towns like this aren't built kindly for women alone." Clara nodded. She had heard that sentence in 100 different voices across 100 different towns. Still, she smiled, because dignity sometimes survives only through small acts of grace. Outside again, Clara paused at the well in the center of town. She gripped the rope and began pulling up a bucket. The wood creaked under the strain. The bucket was heavier than she expected. Her arms trembled slightly, but she kept pulling. A few men sitting near the saloon watched quietly. Not mocking, just curious. A tall rancher leaning against the hitching post nearby pushed himself upright and walked toward her. His boots were polished, his vest clean. A confident grin lived easily on his face. Tom Calder. In Red Hollow, Tom Calder was the kind of man people noticed when he walked into a room. Morning there. His voice carried warmth wrapped around a hint of mischief. Need a hand with that? Clara shook her head softly. Thank you, but I've got it. Tom watched her finish pulling the bucket free. Impressive. Most women passing through town don't bother with well work. Clara lifted the bucket carefully and set it beside the trough. I'm not most women passing through town. Tom chuckled at that. Fair enough. He studied her for a moment before asking. You looking for work? Yes. Thought so. Tom rested one boot on the rail fence. Tell you the truth, ranch life's not exactly gentle work. Sun before sunrise. Dusk till dark. Most men quit before winter even arrives. Clara held his gaze. I'm not afraid of work. Tom smiled again, though this one held something lighter. Less serious. I don't doubt your spirit, miss. But spirit doesn't lift hay bales. He tipped his hat politely. Truth is, what you probably need isn't a job. It's a husband. A few men nearby laughed quietly. Not cruel laughter. Just the easy humor of a town used to simple answers. Clara felt the warmth rise in her cheeks. But she didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply nodded once and stepped away. Dignity can be a powerful kind of silence. Beyond the edge of Red Hollow, the land opened again into rolling pasture. A narrow trail led toward a modest ranch tucked beside a silver ribbon of creek water. The wooden gate read Silver Creek Ranch. A man stood near the corral, mending a broken fence rail. He worked slowly, not with the hurried movements of someone trying to finish a chore, but with the steady rhythm of someone who understood that patience builds stronger things than speed. His hat cast a shadow across his face. Still, something about him felt calm, grounded, like an old oak tree that had learned to survive many winters. Clara approached carefully. The man noticed her, but did not stop working. Good morning. Her voice carried quiet exhaustion, but also a thread of courage. He looked up then. His eyes were thoughtful. Not sharp, not suspicious, just observant. Morning. His voice was low and steady. Clara clasped her hands together gently. I'm looking for work. The man leaned back against the fence post, considering her. What kind of work? Anything honest. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, learn ranch chores if someone teaches me. The wind moved softly through the pasture grass. The man studied her longer than the others had, but there was no mockery in his eyes, only curiosity. Finally he spoke. Name's Elias Boone. I run this place. Clara nodded. Clara Whitmore. Another quiet moment passed between them. Elias glanced toward the house in the distance. Then back at her. I could give you work. Clara felt something fragile stir in her chest. Hope. But Elias continued slowly. Only if you agree to something first. She waited. Elias rested his hands on the fence rail. You'd have to marry me. Clara blinked. The wind whispered through the pasture like it had just heard something surprising. Elias spoke again calmly. By sundown. Clara stared at him. Not offended. Not angry, just stunned. Marry you. Elias nodded once. Yes. Silence stretched between them like the long western horizon. Clara searched his face for signs of a joke. There were none. Why? The question slipped out softly. Elias looked toward the house again, then toward the quiet creek running beside the pasture. A ranch needs two hearts to survive winter. His voice carried no pressure, just truth. If you say no, he added gently, I'll still give you a meal and directions to the next town. Clara stood there in the warm afternoon sunlight. Behind her lay months of wandering roads. Ahead of her stood a stranger offering a life that made no sense, and yet somehow didn't feel wrong. The sun climbed higher over Silver Creek Ranch, and for the first time in a long while, Clara Whitmore felt the weight of a decision that might change everything. The prairie grows quiet in the middle of the day. Not empty quiet, but the kind of stillness that waits for a decision. Clara Whitmore sat beneath a cottonwood tree near the edge of Silver Creek Ranch. The leaves above her whispered gently whenever the wind passed through, like old women trading secrets they had carried too long. The shade felt cool against her tired shoulders. Across the pasture, Elias Boone had returned to his fence work. Hammer. Pause. Hammer again. Each strike careful. Measured. A man who did not rush the shape of things. Clara watched him from a distance. This stranger had offered her the most unusual bargain a wandering woman could hear. Not charity. Not employment. A life. Marriage by sundown. The thought rolled slowly through her mind like distant thunder that hadn't decided whether to become a storm. She rested her elbows on her knees and stared at the dry grass swaying softly in the wind. Marriage. The word used to mean something simple when she was younger. A white ribbon in her mother's hair. A dance beneath lantern light. A promise whispered between two people who already knew the shape of each other's hearts. But life had a habit of bending simple things into strange shapes. Now the word felt heavy, like a door that could not easily be opened again once closed. Clara closed her eyes for a moment. She imagined the road ahead if she walked away from this ranch. Another town, another polite refusal, another cold night sleeping beneath unfamiliar stars. Loneliness had become a quiet companion these past months. It sat beside her at every campfire. It followed her footsteps down every dusty road. Still, marriage to a stranger felt like stepping into a river without knowing how deep the water ran. Her thoughts drifted back to Elias Boone. He had not spoken with charm like Tom Calder. There were no playful smiles, no clever promises, just steady words placed carefully between them. He could have hired her as a servant. He had not. He could have sent her away like the others. He had not. Instead, he offered partnership. Strange, unexpected, but strangely honest. Across the pasture, Elias finished securing the fence rail and set his hammer down. He leaned against the post for a moment, looking toward the wide valley as if measuring the weight of the sky itself. Clara stood slowly and walked toward him. Her boots pressed softly through the grass. Elias noticed her approach, but did not speak right away. Sometimes the quietest men leave space for questions to arrive on their own. Clara stopped a few steps away. "You asked me to marry you." Her voice carried calm curiosity rather than accusation. Elias nodded once. "I did." Clara studied him. "Why?" He took a slow breath, glancing toward the ranch house in the distance. The house stood solid against the prairie wind, its wooden walls weathered but strong. That place used to be louder. Clara waited. Elias rested his arms on the fence rail. "Years ago," he said quietly, "I had a wife." The wind shifted gently across the valley. Her name was Sarah. She filled that house with laughter, the kind that makes walls feel warmer in winter. Clara listened without interrupting. Elias continued slowly. "We were expecting a child one spring. Storm rolled in early that year. Roads turned to mud. Doctor never made it in time." He paused. The silence that followed held more meaning than any words could carry. Clara's heart softened. She understood that kind of silence. The kind grief leaves behind. The baby never took a breath. Sarah followed him not long after. Elias's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon as he spoke. The ranch nearly died that year, too. Fields went untended. Fences fell apart. Some mornings I didn't bother getting out of bed. But time, he said quietly, time has a stubborn way of moving forward whether we're ready or not. So he rebuilt. Fence by fence, field by field. The ranch survived, but the house stayed quiet. Too quiet. Clara felt the truth of that loneliness settle between them. "You're not looking for a servant," she said softly. Elias shook his head. "No, a ranch survives on more than cattle and crops. It needs warmth. Two people watching the same horizon. Two people believing the winter will pass." He finally looked at her then. I don't know you well, Clara Whitmore, but I can see something in you. She raised an eyebrow gently. And what is that? Courage. Not loud courage. The quiet kind that keeps walking even when the road gives you no reason to. Clara looked down at her boots. Dust clung stubbornly to the leather. I've just been trying to survive. Elias nodded. That's where most courage begins. The afternoon drifted forward. Clara walked with Elias toward the town later that day. Not because they needed anything, but because a wedding, even a strange one, deserved witnesses. Red Hollow looked much the same as before. Dusty streets, quiet porches, a few curious eyes. The first person to notice them together was Martha Pike, the town baker. Martha stood outside her shop brushing flour from her apron. Her round face brightened with curiosity. Well now, that's a pairing I didn't expect today. Clara smiled shyly. Elias tipped his hat. Martha's eyes sparkled as she glanced between them. Don't tell me. She paused for dramatic effect. You two are getting married. Elias nodded. Before sundown. Martha clapped her flour-covered hands together. Well, goodness gracious. Red Hollow hasn't had a wedding in 3 years. Sheriff Dalton appeared not long after. The old lawman walked with the slow confidence of someone who had seen enough of life to stop rushing through it. Marriage, he said thoughtfully, that's either the bravest decision a person can make or the most foolish. Sometimes both. Clara chuckled softly. Sheriff Dalton studied her kindly. You sure about this, miss? Clara glanced toward Elias. He stood quietly beside her, not pushing, not persuading, just waiting. She realized something important in that moment. This man would never force her into anything. Even now, she could still walk away. But she didn't want to. Yes, she said softly. I'm sure. The ceremony took place beside the well in the center of town. No ribbons, no music, just a few curious townsfolk gathering nearby. Sheriff Dalton cleared his throat. Well now, I suppose we ought to make this official before the sun changes its mind. Elias and Clara stood facing each other beneath the warm glow of the evening sky. No rings rested between them, just two pairs of weathered hands. Sheriff Dalton spoke simply. Do you promise to face the seasons ahead together, whatever they may bring? Elias answered first. I do. His voice carried steady certainty. Clara took a breath. The wind brushed gently against her cheek like a quiet blessing. I do. The sheriff nodded. Then by the power vested in me by the fine people of Red Hollow, I reckon you two are husband and wife. A few soft cheers followed. Martha Pike wiped a joyful tear from her eye. Well now, she said warmly, every marriage deserves at least one good pie. Night settled slowly as Elias and Clara returned to Silver Creek Ranch. The house waited quietly beneath the rising stars. Elias opened the door for her. Clara stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and old memories. The house was simple. A sturdy table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace. Then Clara noticed something near the window. A cradle, small, wooden, covered in a thin layer of dust. Tom seemed to pause around it. Clara looked back at Elias. He said nothing, just watched her quietly. The sun dipped below the hills outside, and Clara Whitmore realized something gently but clearly. This house carried stories long before she arrived, and somehow, they were now hers too. Morning at Silver Creek Ranch arrived with the soft sound of hooves shifting in the corral. The sky wore a pale blue coat, still stretching itself awake while the first rays of sunlight brushed the tops of the hills. Clara Whitmore stood on the porch with a tin cup of coffee warming her hands. The world here moved differently than the road had. On the road, every sunrise meant uncertainty. Here it meant chores. And strangely enough, Clara found comfort in that. Behind the barn, Elias Boone was already at work, brushing down a chestnut horse whose coat shone like burnished copper beneath the early light. He worked the same way he did everything else. Steady, unhurried, like a man who understood that rushing rarely made things stronger. Clara watched him for a moment before stepping down from a porch. The grass still carried droplets of morning dew that kissed the edges of her boots. I can help with that, she said gently. Elias glanced up. His eyes softened slightly. You ever brushed a horse before? Clara shook her head. No, but I'm willing to learn. Elias handed her the brush. That's usually the best qualification. The horse snorted softly when Clara approached, as if measuring the stranger standing beside it. Clara moved slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a nervous friend. The brush moved awkwardly at first. She missed spots, pressed too lightly, then too hard. The horse shifted impatiently. Clara sighed under her breath. I believe he prefers someone who knows what they're doing. Elias chuckled quietly. That makes two of us. He stepped beside her, gently guiding her hand. Like this. Long strokes. Let the horse know you're not afraid of him. Clara followed the motion. The horse relaxed beneath the steady rhythm. For a moment, the three of them stood together in the golden light of morning. Man, woman, horse, learning each other slowly. That became the pattern of life at Silver Creek Ranch. Clara rose early. She learned to feed the chickens without startling them into chaos. She discovered that cows had stubborn personalities and very little respect for careful plans. She burned the first loaf of bread she attempted, then the second. The third loaf came out half decent. Elias ate it anyway without complaint. Every mistake was met with the same calm patience. No teasing, no sighs of frustration, just quiet encouragement. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the ranch began to recognize her footsteps. The wind carried new sounds through the yard. Clara's laughter returned in small pieces. It happened the afternoon. She accidentally spilled a bucket of grain, and the chickens erupted into what looked like a feathered stampede. Elias watched the chaos unfold, then laughed. A deep, surprised laugh that seemed to startle even him. Clara joined in. The sound drifted across the pasture like sunlight breaking through clouds. Not everyone at the ranch had been there from the beginning. 2 weeks after the wedding, a rider arrived along the dusty road. Jake Moreno, tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm presence that matched the rhythm of the ranch. He had worked for Elias years ago before leaving to help his family through a difficult winter. Now he had returned. Jake removed his hat respectfully when Clara stepped onto the porch. Ma'am, Clara smiled kindly. Just Clara is fine. Jake nodded. Beside him stood a younger girl barely past 16. Bright eyes, curious smile. This is my sister Lily, Jake explained. Clara's heart warmed immediately. Lily carried the kind of restless curiosity that belonged to young souls who had not yet been worn down by life's harder edges. Within days, the two women were inseparable. Lily followed Clara through the kitchen, asking endless questions. How do you make biscuits rise like that? Why do cows stare at people like they know secrets? Do you think Elias has ever danced? Clara laughed often, more than she had in years. Old Ben Carter, the ranch cook, watched these changes from his rocking chair beside the barn. Ben had cooked meals for cowboys longer than most of them had been alive. He chewed tobacco slowly and observed people the way old owls observe the night. One evening he leaned toward Jake and muttered quietly, "That house needed a woman's laughter again." Jake nodded. Truth is, so did the boss. Trust grew the way wildflowers grow in spring. Slowly, quietly. One evening a storm rolled across the valley. Thunder grumbled through the sky like an old wagon crossing rough ground. Rain began tapping gently against the ranch windows. Clara sat near the fireplace, mending a torn shirt. The thunder cracked suddenly. Sharp, violent. Clara's hands froze. For a moment, she was no longer inside the warm ranch house. She was back at the old homestead, watching the sky turn black, watching her father ride into a storm he would never return from. Her breath grew shallow. The needles slipped from her fingers. Elias noticed. He walked into the room quietly and sat beside her, not asking questions, just sitting there. The thunder rolled again. Clara whispered without looking up. Storms used to mean danger where I came from. Elias nodded slowly. Sometimes they still do. Another flash of lightning painted the room in silver light. Clara closed her eyes. I lost everything during a storm once. Elias placed another piece of wood on the fire. Flames danced softly between them. Fear does not make you weak, he said gently. It only proves you love something deeply. Clara felt tears rise quietly behind her eyes. But they were not tears of grief. There was something gentler. Relief. Because someone finally understood. From that night forward, something changed between them. Not dramatically. No grand gestures. Just small moments. Shared coffee before sunrise. Quiet conversations while repairing fences. The comfort of knowing someone else was near. Clara planted flowers beside the porch one afternoon. Wild daisies she had gathered near the creek. When Elias returned from checking the far pasture, he paused at the sight. Color against the weathered wood. Life where there had once been only dust. There for the house, Clara said shyly. Elias nodded thoughtfully. The house likes them. But not every heart in Red Hollow celebrated their strange marriage. One afternoon, a rider appeared at the ranch gate. Tom called her. His horse kicked dust into the air as he dismounted. Clara stepped onto the porch cautiously. Tom tipped his hat. Afternoon, Mrs. Boone. The words carried a playful edge. Elias walked up behind her. Tom leaned casually against the fence. Heard some interesting stories around town lately. Elias folded his arms. Stories travel fast in small towns. Tom nodded. That they do. Some folks say Clara here only married you because she didn't have anywhere else to go. Others say you took advantage of a woman who was desperate. Clara felt a quiet sting settle in her chest. Tom shrugged. People like talking. Elias's voice stayed calm. People also like being wrong. Tom smiled thinly. Maybe. Maybe not. He mounted his horse again. Just figured you two ought to know what folks are whispering. Dust rose behind him as he rode away. The ranch fell silent again. That evening, Clara stood alone beside the creek. The water moved gently over smooth stones, reflecting the fading colors of sunset. She wrapped her arms around herself. The whispers from town echoed in her thoughts. Was this marriage just survival? A convenient arrangement between two lonely people? Or had something real begun growing beneath the surface? Behind her, footsteps approached softly. Elias stopped beside her. He didn't speak right away. The creek continued its quiet song. Clara finally asked the question that had been waiting patiently in her heart. Did you only ask me to marry you because you needed someone here? Elias stared at the moving water. His answer did not come quickly, because the truth, like the prairie wind, rarely arrives in a hurry. And Clara realized something important in that moment. Sometimes the most important answers take time to grow. The creek moved quietly beside them. Silver Creek had always been a patient listener. It carried the stories of the valley in its gentle current, smoothing rough memories against stone until they became something softer. Clara Whitmore stood at its edge, watching the water slide past. Beside her, Elias Boone remained silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of strangers, but the careful quiet of a man choosing his words with respect. Clara's question still rested between them. Did you only ask me to marry you because you needed someone here? The wind shifted through the cottonwoods. Leaves whispered overhead. Elias finally spoke. At first, yes. His voice carried honesty, not defense. The ranch was quiet. Too quiet. Every room in that house reminded me of something I had lost. He bent down and picked up a small stone, rolling it slowly between his fingers. Some mornings the silence felt heavier than the work. Clara listened without interrupting. I told myself a practical thing, Elias continued. A ranch needs two people, two sets of hands, two people watching the seasons together. He tossed the stone gently into the creek. But somewhere along the way, that reason changed. Clara turned slightly toward him. Elias met her eyes. I began noticing things. The way you refuse to give up when a task feels impossible. The way the house feels warmer when you laugh. The flowers you planted beside the porch. His voice softened. I asked you to marry me out of loneliness. But I stayed married to you because I began admiring the woman you are. The words settled quietly in Clara's heart. Not grand declarations, just simple truth. And sometimes truth carries more weight than romance. Before Clara could answer, the distant sound of hooves echoed across the valley. Both of them turned. Tom Calder rode toward the ranch again. The horse stopped near the fence. Tom dismounted with the same easy confidence he always wore. Afternoon again. Elias nodded politely, but said nothing. Tom's gaze settled on Clara. I figure we should talk. Clara folded her hands calmly. About what? Tom leaned against the fence rail. About the fact that everyone in Red Hollow knows this marriage was a bargain. His words were smooth but sharp. You were desperate. Elias needed help. Convenient arrangement for both of you. Clara felt a flicker of irritation. Not anger, just clarity. Tom continued. You don't have to stay here, Clara. You deserve something better than a marriage built on survival. The valley wind moved through the tall grass. Clara studied Tom carefully. For the first time, she noticed something she had missed before. He did not see her. Not really. He saw an opportunity. A story he had already decided was true. You offered to help me once before, Clara said calmly. Tom smiled, still offering. Ride with me to the next town. We'll figure something out. Clara looked toward Elias. He stood quietly beside the fence, not interfering, not pleading, just trusting her to choose. That trust felt stronger than any argument. Clara turned back to Tom. Thank you, but I'm exactly where I want to be. Tom's smile faded slightly. You're settling for less. Clara shook her head gently. No, I'm choosing something real. Tom mounted his horse slowly. Suit yourself. He tipped his hat one last time. Dust rose behind him as he rode away. Evening began settling across the valley. The sky turned amber. But peace rarely lasts long on the prairie. Jake Moreno came riding hard from the far pasture not long after. Boss. Elias stepped forward. What is it? Jake pointed toward the distant hills. Smoke. Clara followed his gaze. A thin gray ribbon curled upward into the sky. Then another. Wildfire. The wind picked up suddenly. Dry grass swayed like nervous whispers. Fire moved quickly across prairie land. Faster than horses sometimes. Jake spoke urgently. Winds pushing it straight toward the ranch. Elias's voice stayed calm. Get the cattle moving toward the creek. Water's our best barrier. Jake rode off immediately. Clara stepped forward. What can I do? Elias looked at her carefully. You should go to town. Safer there. Clara shook her head before he finished. No. He frowned slightly. Clara, this is my home too. The words surprised even her. But they felt true. Elias saw the determination in her eyes. Then he nodded. Stay close to the creek. They worked through the night. Jake and the other hands drove cattle toward the water. Old Ben hauled buckets to soak the barn roof. Lily helped Clara beat back sparks that drifted dangerously close to the fence line. The sky turned red. Smoke carried the scent of burning grass. The fire roared across the hills like an angry ocean. But Silver Creek stood in its path. Water slowed the flames. Wind shifted. The long battle stretched through dark hours. Clara's arms ached. Her clothes smelled of smoke. But she refused to stop. Beside her, Elias moved with steady determination. Two people fighting for the same place. For the same future. Finally, near dawn, the wind softened. The flames weakened. The fire passed around the valley like a storm losing strength. By sunrise, only smoldering patches of grass remained. Silver Creek Ranch still stood. Tired ranch hands gathered near the porch. Jake wiped soot from his face. We made it. Old Ben chuckled. Ranch tougher than it looks. Clara leaned against the porch railing. Exhaustion wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. Elias walked toward her. For a moment, they simply stood there watching the first sunlight spill across the fields. The land looked scarred but alive, like two people who had survived difficult years. Elias finally spoke. I meant what I said by the creek yesterday. Clara looked at him. This marriage started because we were both trying to survive. He stepped closer, but somewhere along the way, I fell in love with a woman who refused to quit. Clara felt warmth rise quietly in her chest. Not the wild spark of sudden passion. Something steadier, stronger. Love had not arrived with thunder. It had arrived with patience. Shared work. Quiet understanding. She reached for his hand. Then I suppose we're even. Elias raised an eyebrow. Even? Clara smiled gently. Because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with a man who never tried to change who I was. The wind moved softly across the valley. Two tired souls stood beneath the morning sun, choosing each other again, not out of desperation, but out of truth. 1 year later, spring returned to Silver Creek Ranch. The grass grew thick and green again. Flowers lined the porch where Clara had planted them. Inside the house, the old cradle by the window had been polished clean. It no longer carried dust, just quiet hope. Life had a way of beginning again when two hearts decided to keep going. Sometimes life does not begin with perfect love stories. Sometimes it begins with strange choices, quiet courage, and two people simply trying to survive the same storm. But if kindness grows in that space, if patience takes root, then love can bloom in the most unexpected places. And maybe that is the truest kind of love there is. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more Wild West tales told from the quiet corners of the frontier. And tell me something I always love to know. Where in the world are you watching from tonight?